Hello viewers and welcome to another Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 video. One of the things that impresses me the most about Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is its amazing focus on realism and attention to historical detail. One of the scenes that best exemplifies this, in my opinion, is the feast at Trotsky Castle. In this video, I'm going to quickly point out some of the things that really impressed me. I will also point out a few things that aren't as accurate historically. Let me know in the comments if you knew that these were realistic historical facts, or let me know if you disagree with me and you think that I'm wrong. And as always, if you enjoy this content, hit the like, subscribe, and notification bell so that you don't miss any of my future videos. And with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. So let's start off with something very basic, which is the seating arrangements here at the feast, and I think that those are pretty well done. You can see that the tables form a U shape around the high table, and this would allow all of the guests to be able to view the Lord and the Lord to see all of their guests, and nobody would have to turn their head and crane around to look behind them. Probably the most important factor is that no guest would be sitting with their back to the Lord, which could be viewed as being very rude. In the center of the high table, we see Sir Otto with his chamberlain, or his chancellor Ulrich, who is in this case quite literally his right-hand man. If Sir Otto was married, we'd expect to see his wife sitting to his left side, especially since this feast is taking place at his home castle in his seat of power. Overall, this part of the seating arrangements is very well done. It's very accurate. That's what we would expect to see in a medieval feast hall. Historically, guests would have been seated in order of social precedence. Unfortunately, it's very difficult for us to tell if that is followed for this scene. Most of the guests here are vassals and they control territory that is quote-unquote off map, and so we can't really gauge their wealth or their social status. However, one person who I think might be seated a bit too far away from Lord Otto is his burgrave. While a burgrave might not be a high-ranking noble in his own right, the position was one of great importance, as it was essentially the military commander for a castle, sort of like a castellan in some ways, castellan being more common in Western Europe. However, without knowing the social status of the other attendees, it's impossible for us to say if this is inaccurate or not. Ultimately, Sir Otto and the Chancellor are meant to be the focus of this scene, and that part of the seating arrangements is very accurate and well done. One thing I also want to point out here is that all of the guests are seated on one side of the table, and that leaves the center of that U open, and you can see that this is where the food dishes are being placed, and this would be pretty accurate because you wouldn't want to have servants reaching over the guests with these big plates of food, because that was kind of an accident waiting to happen. Realistically, a lot of times the servants that were filling like the glasses and the cups would also be coming from the center of the U for the same reasons. You don't want to accidentally have somebody spill a pitcher of wine onto an important guest. And in this scene, Catherine is standing behind them. We do know that this actually happened from some of the contemporary art that we have of medieval feasts, so this isn't exactly inaccurate, it just might be a little bit less common. And overall, I think that everything here, from the seating arrangements to the high table, down to the way that the center of the U is left open and this is where the food dishes are being placed at, that is all very accurate and well done. As the scene starts, Sir Hans and Henry are presenting themselves to the high table and conversing with Sir Otto, and this scene is very well done in my opinion. If the two guests had arrived late, as the Chancellor states or insinuates, then they would have been required or expected to present themselves to the hosting lord. I really like the dialogue here between Sir Hans, Sir Otto, and Ulrich, because I think it does a fantastic job of capturing the sort of thinly veiled insults that occurred at court, as well as the ways in which nobles might attempt to provoke a loss of composure. For example, Sir Otto surely knew that making Ulrich the commander would upset Sir Hans, and he likely told him this deliberately to try to provoke an uncourtly loss of composure. During this time period, it was believed that a loss of self control indicated someone who had dangerously imbalanced humors or just a dangerously imbalanced temperament. Such people were seen as unreliable and not fit for positions of great responsibility, and Sir Hans kind of plays right into this, which is a great way of showing his relative youth and immaturity because he allows himself to be so obviously provoked into an uncourtly loss of composure. This dialogue to me is very, very realistic, especially between rivals in a setting where they are expected to behave with grace and dignity. And this is exactly the type of thing that one might expect to find in a medieval feast hall between two lords from rival factions. So, absolute A plus on this dialogue and this opening part of the scene. So I want people to pause here and just look at all of the candles in this footage. You have the chandeliers, you have the candles that are on the table, you have more candles on the wall. And I think that this is really cool. And a lot of people might kind of ask why? Like what does that mean? And to me, this actually adds an incredible degree of realism. If we remember, Sir Otto is portrayed as one of the wealthiest men in the kingdom. It's important to note that at this time period, candles burned cleaner than torches. I mean, they still burn cleaner than torches, but they're significantly more expensive as well. Only the very wealthiest lords could afford to use this many candles, and a man like Sir Otto would have realized this, and by using all of these candles, it's a very subtle, understated way to show off his wealth and his prestige. It's something that's not as flashy as, showing a bunch of golden plates or golden goblets or showing off a bunch of jewels or silks, but this is very much the same in terms of demonstrating your wealth and your prestige, but it's just a much more subtle way of doing it. And for somebody as conservative as Sir Otto is, it makes sense that he would prefer to do something that's more conservative as opposed to being more flashy. So I thought this was a really cool way to demonstrate Sir Otto's wealth in a very historically accurate manner that is something that a lord in his time period with his personality probably would have done. I really like the use of painted walls in Kingdom Come Deliverance too, not just here in Trusky, but in most of the manor houses across the game world. This is incredibly realistic. Painted walls were a very popular way for the wealthy to demonstrate their wealth and decorate their homes. Paintings would have included scenes just like the one we see behind Sir Otto, which appears to depict noblemen on the hunt. In fact, this was a very popular theme in a lot of wall art from the Middle Ages, and it makes sense as to why, because hunting this way was the purview and the privilege of the nobility. So depicting a scene like this was not only artistic and decorative, it was also a way to once again kind of subtly state your social position and your social prestige. And this adds a very realistic feel to Sir Otto's halls, and I also like the fact that the scenes will differ across different manors in the game, and once again, this sort of is designed to fit into the house or the lord that controls that manor. Some of them have just coats of arms and designs, others have more scenes on them, and that's very realistic. You would want your painted wall to be a very unique reflection of you as a lord. So, two thumbs up on this. I think it's awesome. I really like the fact that almost all of the dishes being served here are communal platters. This is exactly how medieval feasts were really conducted. Most food was brought out on these communal platters, and guests were expected to remove these items from that platter and place them onto their own plate, bowl, or trench, I believe is what the other term was. One thing here that is a little bit inaccurate, at least in my opinion, is that people are using spoons and forks to eat and serve. In general, the use of a communal fork, especially, is pretty inaccurate. Forks were used by this period, but it was customary for guests to bring their own forks that were transported in a cadena or cadena. It's a special box that was there for this purpose. They would normally use this fork to serve themselves off of the communal platter. However, the fork was by no means a universal implement. In fact, it never really caught on at all in medieval England, and the English actually viewed the fork as being a, quote, feminine luxury, quote. In addition, the church went through phases of disapproval. After all, why would you ever use a fork when God had given you two perfectly good hands to eat with? Obviously, hygiene was not necessarily a major concern. These little asides taken into account, the use of communal forks on each platter strikes me as a bit unrealistic, and it would have been much more likely that guests brought their own forks with them or simply used their fingers, while some of Sir Otto's more refined guests, such as Sir Florian, would probably prefer the effeminate fork. I could see a man's man like the Burgrave Hasheg gladly using his fingers to eat. So this is one area that I do think is a little bit inaccurate, but by no means is that definitely a break on realism, because we do know that the technology, the utensils, did exist and were commonly used throughout medieval Europe by this point, except in the British Isles. So there are a couple of quests that are given at the feast, one of which is basically to cause some courtly drama. And this is obviously romantic drama. And while the quest itself is a little bit unrealistic, I mean, it's unlikely that a lord, especially one like Sir Otto, would allow a duel to occur mid feast. The premise is pretty accurate. Feasts at the court of a powerful lord would have been awash with all sorts of intrigue, maneuvering, and of course, the game of courtly love. So it's not at all unrealistic that one knight might try to embarrass another at a feast. In fact, this was very common because one of the things that knights would try to do to social rivals is cause them to lose their self control and have an uncourtly loss of control in the front of everybody, and this would cause them to lose face and lose reputation. Similarly, the second quest involves Henry having a little fling with a noblewoman because, that's never happened in Kingdom Come Deliverance before. But this is also pretty realistic since feasts were, at least by reputation, an epicenter for both love and lust. This is likely because of the copious amounts of alcohol involved. I think that most of us who have attended a wedding reception in modern times would probably be able to relate to this, with a lot of young men and young women just being very interested in trying to hook up with each other. During the feast, there's an option to play dice, and I think this is probably a little bit less realistic. While dice games were very popular at the time, leaving the feasting table to go and play dice in a corner would probably have come off as being pretty rude. Dice was something that would probably have been done later in the night once the main part of the feast had been completed. In general, it's worth noting that leaving a feast without excusing yourself to the host first was generally considered to be very uncourteous and rude, which is why I think it's kind of funny that Sir Hans storms out of the feast right after you talk to him. But in the case of Sir Hans, I think that actually adds a lot to the realism of that situation, because by that point, Sir Hans is just so over everything that's happening in the Trotsky region. He's almost gone to the gallows, he's had slop thrown on his head, he's been put in the stocks, and he's just so frustrated and over it, he kind of just doesn't care about the courtesy and etiquette anymore at this point, and I think that actually adds a lot of character to the scene. And so it's one of those things that is technically historically inaccurate because he probably wouldn't have done that without repercussions, but I think it's a really great touch that just makes the game story a lot more engaging. And I'll talk about this a lot of my other videos. Anytime a game developer is dealing with trying to create a realistic world, they have to balance realism with creating an immersive and engaging story. And in this case, that deviation from realism makes the story a little bit more immersive and kind of brings more emotion into it. It makes the story better overall. So those are exactly the types of breaches in realism and historical accuracy that are not only acceptable but a really good thing for the game. So overall, this feast at Trotsky Castle just captures so many small details that show the developers put a lot of effort into faithfully creating a medieval world. The use of candles to demonstrate wealth was something that was very cool to me because it's something that isn't very well known outside of historians. Similarly, a detail like the painted walls is really cool because, once again, this is something that a lot of people don't think of, but was very common and popular during the Middle Ages. Overall, there are many scenes like this in KCD2 that just show this incredible attention to detail when it comes to faithfully creating a medieval setting. However, this scene at Trotsky Castle stands out to me because it feels so authentic and real. The more subdued nature of the feast even captures Sir Otto's character very well. He's a very strict, conservative lord who probably wouldn't tolerate a lot of the boisterous rowdiness that might occur at other feasting halls. But what do you guys think? What little details did I miss in this scene that contribute to the realism experience for you? Let me know in the comments section below, and as always, if you liked the video, hit the like, subscribe, and notification buttons, and take care until the next time.